Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled are actress Mariette Hartley and author Chip Jacobs. Actress, author, mental health activist Mariette Hartley has been an enduring star on the stage, screen, and TV for more than 30 years. She was born and raised in Connecticut and started her acting career as a teenager. Mariette was mentored by the great Eva Le Gallienne. She's hosted the AM show.
Yeah, morning program.
That was really something, the AM show for the network. But you all remember her as James Garner's wife in those Polaroid commercials. I know you remember that. She was enchanting, and Mariette continued to enchant us with her stage work. How did you get started, actually?
Well, it was earlier than my teenage years. I was 10.
Oh, it was?
And I saw a wonderful production of Jack and the Beanstalk. Westport, Connecticut was the home of the famous artist school. So the men had all done the sets, the women had done these extraordinary costumes, and I looked at my mother and I said, I have to do this, and I never stopped.
But there was no show business in your family?
Well, my mother was a terrific actress, but she wasn't paid for it.
But your grandfather was a famous psychologist.
Yes.
Do you think that had anything to do with it?
I don't know. He wasn't into acting. He was into trying not to touch children and trying...
Were those his theories?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm going back on Monday to speak at his alma mater where behaviorism began. I'm speaking at Johns Hopkins, which is an amazing experience for me as his granddaughter. Yeah, I mean, my mother was deeply affected by his theories, as I think a whole generation of children were.
Oh, so it wasn't that embracing love,
Oh, no.
if that's what he was...
No.
That's interesting.
No, I made up for it. I nursed my children until they were 16 and 17.
I was going to say, you didn't use his theories.
No.
You were like quite the opposite with your children?
I had a lot of therapy by that time and knew that I obviously needed it because,
They needed pacifiers, your kids, by the time they were 17.
No, they didn't.
I said you were gutsy for having written Breaking the Silence. Enchanting and gutsy, let me say them both together. How did you have, since we're talking about your grandfather and the past, and I think a lot of that background had much to do with your upbringing.
Yeah, I was very nervous about writing about it because I lived in a family that really didn't talk about the truth or, our experience of the truth, our perceptions of the truth. We didn't really talk about the real feelings. So really writing about it was quite frightening. And I think the amazing thing is that when we do start writing about it, when we do start talking about it, something extraordinary happens. It's as if the universe shifts, and that did happen for me.
Aren't you afraid when the universe starts shifting? I mean, it seems like
if you're ready for it, I think it's wonderful. If you've really prepared yourself for it. I mean, the thing that's been so exciting about this for me is that it's opened up an entirely new career for me, which is a good thing because the older you get in this business. As a writer, but mostly as you said, as a mental health advocate. And I work with suicide survivors, and I have for a long time. I've been in the trenches literally since 1985, 86, ever since I did Silence of the Heart.
But you've done a lot of charity work, and you do. And that's so important. I mean, suicide prevention is almost like a charity kind of thing, isn't it?
For me, it isn't. It isn't. It has nothing really to do with charity. It has to do with a desperate need to present a solution for people, because at the time that it happened to me, at the time that my father took his life in 1963, there was no solution. There were no groups, there was no knowledge that...
Nobody to talk to.
No, and there was no awareness that survivors of this particular kind of death, that is a completely different kind of grieving because of the shame and the stigma and the blame and all that stuff. So what we do in the groups, and they're 8-week groups, we literally try to help the survivors through minefields.
Oh, so you do that. But you do that with handgun prevention too? You're very active in that?
Not as much as I'd like to be.
I see.
I kind of do it this way. I kind of come in through the back door, you know.
And combating mental illness?
Yes.
We talked about that. Is
Yeah.
that part of the suicide thing, or is
Of
that
course.
totally separate?
No,
it
of course
is.
it is. Of course it is. I mean, when I came out about my own bipolar disorder, it was obviously because it had been something that was in my family for years. I mean, I think definitely my grandfather had a problem.
Oh, but but nobody ever said anything about it.
Nobody.
Or maybe he didn't know it either, right?
Oh no, I don't think that nobody ever talked about that. No one was educated as far as that was concerned.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
And you know, Big John, we called him Big John, was a big. I mean, he didn't believe in genetics. He believed that everything, you know, happened at that moment, which is crazy. I mean, I think alcoholism is genetically passed on, and that was in my family for eons. It's been an amazing thing to kind of come to terms with it. I really realize that, you know, when you're the adult child of 2 alcoholics, which is what it was for me, and who are also mentally ill, you're really defending against their defense against mental illness. And if you understand that, I
defending
mean,
against
their defense, which was alcohol.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
because they were using that as their defense.
As their defense.
I see, and now I see.
So as an adult, you sit there and you go, wow, how do I sort all of this out? And my journey has been, I mean, I don't know that it ever ends, but my journey has certainly been trying to find the different layers. And, you know, I think my first addictions were denial and illusion.
But
And
those can be too,
Oh,
can't
they
they?
work. They absolutely work until they don't.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful that they stopped working.
Were you involved in any of that when you first started, like when you were doing all those commercials? And you weren't even aware of what was going on?
Well, my dad had already passed by the time I started the commercials, and I was in a
And when you were doing the morning show, were
oh,
any
no,
of
that
these
was
things?
years later. That was years later.
So none of these things really
The only
came?
thing that happened in the morning program was that I remember there was a rash of suicides in New Jersey.
Oh.
And we brought the school in. It was in Bergenfeld. And we brought the school in, and I went and spoke to the kids. And it was one of the most moving experiences I had had. And it was, I think that working with survivors, as opposed to just therapy, which you know works
which you go to,
also,
right.
yeah. But it gives my pain great meaning, and it has been just a glorious experience for me. And I had no idea. I mean, you know, I always say that many of us get to heaven by backing away from hell, and that's kind of the way it happened for me. And my life today is heavenly. You know, it really is.
Have you taken those issues to the stage? Any of the things we've been talking about?
Oh yes, I did a one-woman show that was based on this book.
And I didn't get to see
Oh,
it, and I'd
God.
love to see it again. Will you do it again?
If I have the energy, I did 10 people. I played my mother, my father. I played myself as a 4-year-old. You know, what it was
great.
like to be raised in that family and the residents in the rest of my life. It was an extraordinary experience for me. It was literally like being inside the DNA of my family. It was galvanizing for me.
Because you had to actually put yourself in the place of all those people.
Yes.
Right.
And it was a great lesson. And the hardest voice was my dad's.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
'cause
I loved him so much.
That's very tough, isn't it? But now you're in another play. We're talking about the theater. You did this one-woman show. Now you're in something called...
Joan, I'll tell you, I can't leave the theater. I mean, I am such a theater brat. And this one is called In the Wings.
I'm going to hold this up so we see
My wonderful husband wrote it.
Jerry Soroka. Tell us the story.
Well, it's autobiographical. He and his ex-wife had a lot of troubles with fertility. So this is a comedy around the subject of fertility. And the only reason it's a comedy is because it's a play within a play. It's a day of rehearsal. There are 9 more days left, and the producer, Julie, decides that she's going to come in and fire the leading lady and play that part. And of course,
is that you?
No.
Oh, that's not you.
No, I'm supporting in this. I'm not. I'm basically using my name for whatever it's worth.
Did he write you into it?
Yeah, he kind of did.
Did he do this for you?
No, I don't think so.
But it's a comedy, you said. Is it different for you, the timing and all that?
Oh, I love comedy. My God, what were the Polaroid commercials if not comedy?
It's that timing, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know how many years of those I did?
No.
7 years of those.
So
we did 250 of those. But
did you have to learn all that? Oh, you did do comedy before. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a certain kind of acting ability, isn't it?
Yeah, but basically acting is all about listening.
Yeah, right. So you worked with the director. Have you worked with that director before who's directing you in
Don
this?
Eitner directed my one-woman show, yes.
So you were familiar, he was familiar with you?
Yes.
Does he have a certain vision? Did he have a vision for In the Wings?
Well, I hope so. He certainly did have one for my show. We'll see. Comedy, again, is very different to direct than drama. And I think parts of it are wonderful. It's all in the growing stages, and I think that we got a wonderful review from Cynthia Citron, and who got it. I mean, it's either a play that you get or you don't get.
Because of it being within a play.
Yes, a play within a play. Actors, dysfunction in a cast, the diva. Jerry's daughter Liz is wonderful. She plays the dumbest girl on earth, and.
So you're in a show business family now.
Yeah.
You have a writer husband.
And my own daughter is a wonderful actress, and my son is in the business, and so yeah, we have family full of very talented kids.
So do you think this play will go to off-Broadway?
I hope so. The unfortunate thing about opening plays here is that they don't really take the reviewers very seriously, which is because I really wanted my show to go somewhere.
I thought your show would have been.
I thought so, and actually, I was being driven by this cute girl that did a one-woman show, and she's now trying to get into, Galway and places like that, up in Canada too, the Una play, and I thought, that might be a terrific way to get back into it once I, get that energy, because it's exhausting to do a one-person show.
What about those festivals?
That's what I mean.
In Scotland.
That's what I'm trying to say. Those festivals.
Festivals. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Because those are very intense, and you do it really quickly, but everyone sees it because there's thousands of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
And then this wouldn't do that. This play wouldn't do that.
This is different. This would be great in a place like Florida. It's very Jewish. It's quite fun.
Is it?
And because the comedy is so great. I mean, Jerry is a wonderful, literate, funny writer. He starred in Godspell. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Godspell. He played Herbie.
Oh.
He had that big black hair.
Right.
And he's just born with a funny bone. And he makes me laugh all the time. He has about 60 voices that he does, so I never know who I'm going to wake up with in the morning. Somebody said to me, "But that's sexy, right?" And I said, No, wait a minute. We're talking about Woody Allen, Jackie Mason, Jackie Vernon.
Right.
I said, I've never wanted to go to bed with those guys, let alone wake up with them.
Right. So. But you wake up with Jerry and you're happy.
He's great.
Thank you, Mariette.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching this part of our show. We'll be right back with author Chip Jacobs. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm with author Chip Jacobs, who was born and raised in Southern California, graduated from Flint Ridge Prep School in La Cañada, went to USC for his Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, and got his Master's in Foreign Affairs at the American University in Washington, D.C. Chip's book, Wheeling the Deal, is about family in Hollywood. But let's see, what were you doing before this book, Chip?
I was very happy working as an investigative journalist out at the Daily News of Los Angeles.
Oh, you were? You were
Yes,
at the
I-
Daily News, and I
I
was at
was.
the Herald.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
That was fun.
It was. I had a fabulous time there. I had a perfectly good job. I wanted to get to the LA Times like all young Southern California journalists.
Exactly.
And the last person I ever thought I was going to be writing about was the uncle I didn't like. So,
That's very interesting. How long did it take you to write this book?
oh goodness. Well, my hair was a lot browner when I
it's all
started. There you go. Probably on and off about 4 or 5 years.
Why did you write about this uncle that you really didn't like, that you were kind of afraid of in a way? Tell us about him, and then the audience can judge why you would be afraid of him as a child. Because it's normal, isn't it?
It was. I was afraid of my uncle who passed away when I was 14 because he was a quadriplegic with very creepy body features. He had bamboo-like arms, fingers that were twisted and contorted, and he could really only use one arm. But I probably outweighed him by the time I was old enough to really talk back to him.
But he could use one arm?
He could flail one arm, but that was all he could do. He was better off than Christopher Reeve, but not as well off as somebody who could actually have full use of their arms. And so when I would encounter him, he would be in his bed or in his wheelchair, and he had a very loud voice. He was extremely intelligent, and he didn't have a lot of tolerance for little kids.
So tell us about Gordon Zoller. That's your uncle.
Yes.
I'm going to hold this up so
Sure.
we can get a good look at it. And one of the things he says and that you say is he didn't want to be called a cripple.
He didn't consider himself a cripple. If he was alive today, he wouldn't be pulling into the blue handicap spaces. He
wouldn't?
Absolutely not. He would not let people, pamper him. He would not let people feel sorry for him. That's a way to be in his doghouse. He wanted to compete. Maybe if he was starving and wanted to get into a restaurant with a long line, he would go Tiny Tim and act weak and meek, but that was not his personality. And actually, he had a very bad experience speaking to some veterans where they sort of mocked him, and he was there to give them a pep talk, and he realized, I am not a handicapped person because I don't want a handicapped personality.
That's it. The personality didn't match because you said he was always yelling at you as a child and yelling at everyone.
He could be gruff, and certainly he wasn't yelling all the time, but when I got to know him, it wasn't the ambitious, over-the-top dynamo that we'd seen in the 60s. It was more the beaten down guy who was realizing his life battery was running out.
Oh, you mean by the time you
I
got
came
to
around.
Oh,
I have an older
brother. It was the end of his life.
It was. I had an older brother, and he told me incredible tales about Gordon meeting and butting up with Lucille Ball and chatting up Jerry Lewis and really being the most interesting person on the lot where the celebrities went to him. That was before my day.
Tell us a little bit about how he, just give us the story because that's how he got to be in that position. He wasn't born that way.
No, he was not. But he was destined to be that way, I think. And I was destined to write about him. But my grandfather was a prolific Hollywood composer who came from Hungary. He came from Tin Pan Alley. He worked in Hollywood in the 20s and 30s and 40s.
So that was his father.
This was his father, my grandfather. He worked on over 900 movies with people like John Wayne and Bela Lugosi and sort of those names. My uncle was the daredevil son that gave him a constant migraine because my uncle, though he did not like school, was extremely intelligent and crafty and clever and probably wanted to get people's attention. Thus, he was a hooligan. He liked to do doorbell ditch. He would put dynamite caps on the red car.
So he was a brat.
One person's brat's another's scoundrel. Later in life, I found out I was exactly like him. So, I was actually terrorizing the same neighborhoods as he did.
Because you were all raised in that same area, Pasadena area.
Yes, and we had the same DNA, as your previous guest said. But he eventually got kicked out of a Catholic school for jumping out of a window, went to another school, and within 2 months broke his neck attempting a gymnastic stunt he had been warned not to do.
Oh, so that's what happened to him. Was he a teenager?
14 years old.
Just 14.
Yes.
Same age when he passed away. You were when he passed away.
Yes.
That's interesting too, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Woo, you're giving me the creeps.
Yes, it was. He was not expected to live. He had famous doctors come out and diagnose him. He had people telling his parents, bring the family preacher around.
Right.
You're gonna need him. You're gonna have a dead boy and you need a funeral. And he refused to die. And he suffered through all the usual terrible complications quadriplegics did. And this is before penicillin was really regularly used. And it was his will and his love of defiance that got him through.
What year was that?
1940.
Basically? 1940. So what about his will?
Yes.
But he had these caretakers round the clock. What about those caretakers?
Well, eventually he got out of the hospital that he was never expected to, and he came home to a house he'd never seen before because his parents had to move to a smaller place to afford his medical care.
Oh, already they were worried about the medical care.
The devastation began immediately.
I see.
My grandfather, who was a proud movie composer and Hungarian, hated the idea of handouts, and yet he took it through the Motion Picture Fund, which basically kept the family alive.
So he was lucky, and you did have this background in Hollywood.
Yes.
Which I guess comes back down to you, and this
Absolutely.
has got to be a movie, right?
I certainly hope so. But you know, the caretaker was my grandmother.
That's what
she
I was
forfeited
getting at.
her marriage. She forfeited her own peace of mind and plans, and was with him night and day. And at one point, she went 14 years at his side. And this included after my grandfather passed away from the stress. 14 years. And today we're in a massive caretaking crisis in America. But my family was in a caretaking crisis in the 1940s.
Can you imagine? And
No.
you know, your details are so concise. Where did you find all this information? Where did the research come from?
I beat my head on the wall for many years. Everybody had lost records. People were dead. You know, I used to pride myself on being the reporter that could find anything, crack anything. Well, I took myself out of journalism that I have in my blood and made myself the family archaeologist, and I was incompetent. I couldn't dig fast enough. I couldn't get people to talk to me like I always could. Eventually, I found a couple dates, and then the information flooded in. I could go to the libraries.
Is that right?
I would read footnotes of books where he was mentioned. I would network. I would scramble, and eventually I got 60 interviews.
But you tell these stories like you were there. The style is wonderful. It's like you're talking directly to us. I mean, as I read the book, it's like you're saying, Joan, this is what he did this time.
My idols are the Beatles, and they master the personal pronoun, and I think that is the best way.
Is that it?
I think it's the best way to tell a story like this. I didn't want it to be off-putting. Having quadriplegic in the name is a mouthful by itself.
Right.
So I wanted to really talk to people's heart.
Did your mother help you a lot?
My mother was the instigator of this, and halfway through, she wasn't speaking to me.
I know. Isn't that awful? You say that in the book, and you're going like, oh my God, now his mother's not talking to him.
My mom envisioned a Hallmark Hall of Fame TV movie about her uncle, or about her
brother.
older brother, and what I gave.
That's what it was. She thought you'd.
It was going to be saccharine and
beautiful.
maudlin, and he was an inspiration, and he was. But that doesn't tell the truth of it. And that also does injustice to the pain he suffered and he caused. And so halfway through, my mother said, if you continue digging up old murders in the family and chaos and scandal.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, just write me out of the book. And so I, was grappling not only learning about my uncle, but also trying to salvage my relationship with my own mom.
But then you just mentioned it. You found murders in your family.
I did.
You uncovered them, but
I did.
And she didn't want to hear about those things.
They'd repressed it for so long. That is how my uncle and people in the family dealt with some of these tragedies. Much like everybody, it's just easier to go forward like a shark. If you stop and go backwards, you drown.
But how did those murders apply to the story?
Because it made my uncle's survival much more important. I had a great uncle who was a very well-known director who was murdered in 1941 while Gordon laid in bed in a hospital bed named Nat Ross. He helped direct Clara Bow and many famous people. And he was friends with Irving Thalberg, the older generation, nonetheless. It made Gordon's survival extremely important because every healthy male in my family never made it past 40.
Okay, healthy male. He was married.
Yes, he was.
And he was like dying to consummate his marriage.
Yes, he was.
And you talk about
Before Viagra.
I know, and you talk about those injections that he took.
He did. Yes, it makes me,
experimental,
want to cross
right?
my legs thinking about it.
I know.
But he did do it. But you have to remember something. Somebody who's a quadriplegic can't feel anything usually below the point of their injury. So a shot to him was like slapping a piece of wood.
Oh,
So
but it worked, you said.
it did work. He did conceive, and then they lost the baby. And I actually think that was the beginning of his end, because all that he could leave, were movies and things in film canisters. But leaving something alive that might do better than him would have been an answer.
At the end, do you think he was running away from things? He was always traveling. I don't know. When you read this, you can't imagine that he actually could be traveling. How hard it is to travel, just a normal person.
That's right. Yes, he traveled to places he never should. He from South Africa to South America. He went into the Blue Grotto off the coast of Italy
In
at high
Capri?
at high tide. And I guess when he came out, that the boat skip had to press down on his head to get underneath the cave and out. That was my uncle. He didn't want to get cheated. And at the end of his life,
That's interesting. He didn't want to get cheated. He knew what life was because he was fully healthy. And then that health was taken away from him.
In some ways, I think we would all live better if we knew when we were going to die. And I think my uncle knew he wasn't going to live to past 50. And indeed he didn't. And he was going to be darned not to try to suck every bit of juice out of life's marrow. And he did it. And sometimes I think I'm not living my life hard enough.
But when we look back on him, do you think he was a success?
Yes.
That's the final answer to your book.
I think he was a success. And I know that when he passed away, there was a hush and a depression that fell over West Los Angeles, because my uncle had survived canceled TV programs of other people, deaths of friends, accidents, and when my uncle died, it proved, morality is going to get you. Or not morality, mortality.
Mortality. The thing, I was reading the part about Ivan Tors and the
Right.
porpoises, and I mean, that was something that you wouldn't think he'd be involved in.
No, you wouldn't. And can you imagine my uncle going up to Ivan Torres's animal community up in Saugus area, where one stray angry animal and he's toast. My uncle would have been, would have been lion bait, but he loved it.
And I loved having you on today. Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
so interesting about Gordon Zoller wheeling the deal. And keep emailing me, jaquinn1@aol.com, JAQUINN, the numeral 1 at AOL. And write to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, Los Angeles, 90017. We'll see you next time.